Welcome to the Solo CEOs, the podcast for solopreneurs by solopreneurs. Here we celebrate, commiserate, and problem solve all the world's craziness that comes with building a business on your own terms.
I'm Marilyn Johnson, a supplier development and supplier diversity consultant. And
I'm Tara Winston, executive coach and leadership consultant. And we are the Solo CEOs.
Yay! Well, hello, everybody. We are here with the most awesome guest, Mr. Buck Davis.
Oh, thank you.
And you're more than welcome. Let me tell you guys, after you leave this solopreneur experience, you're going to be like, oh, wow, I didn't know that that's really what went on. Buck's journey is amazing. And I can't say thank you enough for joining us today. So,
well, before you even get into Buck's journey, I got to give the audience a little bit of context, right? So Marilyn and I are terrible people to be in a class because we teach classes, we deliver content, and we put on conferences, right? So we very often we get into a class and we're sitting there like, this is some nonsense. We both got in Buck Davis's class taking notes, right? And it's a testament to how good you are as a person that we knew that we wanted you to be one of the first people we brought on.
Oh, so, thank you.
Yeah. Anytime we want to take your content, you're good.
I appreciate that. Now, this is what I say often when people introduce me. I'm like, don't set the bar too high. So people will say, and this guy's going to change your life and he's the best. I'm like, no, say you might like him. He's kind of good. So don't let your audience think that there's some, amazing individual that's about to change their life, because that is not about to happen. I'm just going to share with you how I got to where I am today. And there's plenty ahead for me. I have not arrived, but I'm certainly happy to share, the path that got me to being a solopreneur for 22 years.
Wow. So, Buck, let's jump into it. First, since I know your name is Buck Davis, and Tara said it, sometimes people say, well, what's his name? Buck, why don't you introduce yourself, the name of your company, and then just talk to us about your journey from a 9-to-5 to a solopreneur.
Yeah. So the official name is William Floyd Davis Jr. So if anybody's writing a check today, make it out to WF Davis Jr. But I got Buck the day I was born. My parents were trying to figure out, are we going to call him Bill or Billy or William? And my great-grandfather, we would say my great-granddaddy, was the first person to hold me after I was born. He said, this is my little Buck. And Mom and Dad's like, Buck Davis, that's a good name. And it's been a really good name for me. So the name of the company is Buck Davis and Company. And I do diversity and inclusion training. I'm a workshop facilitator. I also do keynoting. I speak on happiness, positivity. And in the last couple of years, I've been doing trainings and keynotes on how to be positively resilient. But speaking is my lane, and especially the D&I lane. And I got into this lane, so I was 29 when I started my company, and I had been in the printing business for most of my 20s. I was working for a wonderful woman named Mary Barton, and we were print brokers here in Atlanta. And I love printing, I love advertising, but it was just not meaningful for me. And the great thing about her is she was on my side, and she knew that I was not going to be in printing forever, at least with her. And so I'd finished an MBA and I finished a master's degree in counseling. And I had heard of this field called diversity and inclusion, but I didn't know much about it. And as I was exiting the master's in counseling, I started digging into, actually, it was right when the internet was starting to pop. And I started reaching out to companies around the country that just had diversity in their name. And I started calling them. One of the things that I know is a strength of mine is I'm fearless on the phone. I will call anybody. So I was just reaching out to these CEOs. I was reaching out to these consulting firms saying, all right, I think I'm interested in doing what you're doing, and I'm wanting to make a career change. I'm in the printing business and I have this education. So can I just come in and talk to you about what you do and how you do it? I never positioned it as I'm looking for a job.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
people don't really want to talk to job seekers, but they do want to talk to people who are interested in what they do for a living.
Yeah.
And as you know, there's some really nice people in this field,
Yeah.
really nice people. And they're like, sure, come, I'll be happy to talk to you. And you can even sit in one of our diversity training classes going on. So I started talking to people who were doing the work and asking them, so what kind of skills do you need? And what kind of education do you need? And the thing about this field, as you know, is that there's no clear path to the
Right.
D&I world,
No.
which is beautiful and can be difficult at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, well, we want somebody with stand-up facilitation. And I would go back to my boss and say, hey, can I create some training in the printing world for our clients? And so I started getting those skills on my resume and started crafting my resume with the skills that they were looking for. Even though I didn't have the D&I content, that came a little bit later when I started doing volunteering for organizations. But like the Anti-Defamation League, you know those folks, they had a program where they had individuals that were wanting to volunteer to do diversity training. So I got certified in their program. And so I got that on my resume. So I started building the resume to make it look like I could do what I wanted to do.
You
And
know what? Really quick, Buck. What's interesting is from the very beginning, you were able to be laser focused in on something that you became passionate about. And you were laser focused in on something that wasn't super popular 20 something years ago. I need people to understand that over 20 years ago, when you started talking about diversity, it wasn't like it is today. It wasn't top of mind for a lot of companies at all. How many people did you actually run into that didn't even know what you were talking about?
Plenty of people.
Mhm.
Plenty of people, especially when I started contracting, and friends and family were like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I would say, I do diversity and inclusion training. They're like, what is that? We've never heard of that.
Mhm.
And even participants in my classes would say, we didn't know anything like this existed. We didn't know what we were coming to. So there were certainly people ahead of me, and they opened a lot of doors in this field, and we owe them a lot of credit. So there was also a lot of vacancy, and there were not a lot of white guys doing it. So I got hit with that a lot. They're like, what's a white guy doing? Why are you interested in this work? And you're from South Carolina? So, and I'm like, the very question is part of the reason why I want to do this work, is because the color of my skin should make no difference in what I want to do for a living. And so that was a really great way for us to open up the conversation around the importance of this work. But you're right, Marilyn. A lot of people did not know what it was. And prior to me just hearing the phrase, I'd never heard of it before. There was an interracial couple that were out of Seattle, Washington, that were featured on like a 60-minute show. And this is why I tell people who are trying to do career changes, I'm like, if there's any interest that you have and you see it on TV, you hear it on the radio, reach out to the people who are doing it and just ask them, can you talk to them about their life? And there was a couple doing this, and it was really focused on Black and white issues. And I think I actually wrote to the television station and then wrote to them, and they sent me a pamphlet, and I filed that for many years. And I'm like, oh, I think this is what I might want to do. And then one thing just led to the other, where I'm like, yeah, this is definitely an interest of mine. And I feel like if you can hone in on your interest and pull your interest into your career, that it makes it less painful to go to work.
I appreciate the scrappiness.
I do. I'm so impressed. Like, and I am not that girl, so I'm like, I'm taking notes. Like, write the radio. Like, are there radio stations anymore? Write the radio station. So, but there's a big journey from like, I'm going to talk to people and see if they have a job in diversity, and I'm going to start a business in diversity. Like, so what got you to the leap to be a solopreneur?
So as I had the blessing in my 20s of never making any money, and I also didn't have any debt. So if you are wanting to start a business, keep your debt real low, because there's a freedom that comes with not having a bunch of bills. I didn't have an expensive car. I never bought brand new furniture in my 20s. I had a really good coach. My dad was like, nope, you don't need to buy brand new furniture. So those two things really gave me a lot of freedom. And as I was leaving Mary Barton Productions, which was the name of the print brokerage firm, I had finished this degree. I was doing an internship, making $6 an hour. And all the time I was networking with a company called J. Howard and Associates, which you may be familiar with. And at that time, they were like creme de la creme. And I attended a conference that they were hosting a booth at, and I printed cards that said Buck Davis Facilitator, because I believe that what you print, you will become. And I do. If you want to be a songwriter, put it down on paper. If you want to be a medical device salesperson, put it down on a business card, because I think that helps you vision. So I networked with those folks at a conference. It was a diversity and inclusion conference, and just said, hey, this is what I do. And I'd done some of it. And I'm like, do you have to have a full history of doing diversity and inclusion training? They're like, no, we will teach you everything you need to know, but you got to have the platform skills. And so I started interviewing with them. And this is when it was just grueling, because you had interviews, you had videotape, basically auditions in front of your competition. And they gave me a spot on a contract basis. And so they were the first company to give me an opportunity as a subcontractor. And then they sent me out on behalf of them. So I got that one project with them, that one contract with them. And I'm like, okay, if I work 1 day a month for them, I moved to Chicago. I'm like, I can pay all my bills. And so I was making $700 a day doing this. And I'm like, okay, if I get 2 days, then I'll have some extra money. So that was sort of the leap into the contracting world. And then I worked for them for years. And then over the course of doing their work, I started noticing ways that I could do the work differently, not necessarily better, but with my flair on it. So I started developing my own content while I was still working with them. And then I met a wonderful woman who worked for a big insurance company. And she had seen me in a training class. And when she was doing another round of training, a different subset of employees, she called me and said, I would really love for you to lead this thing. And we would love for you to develop the content for our next round. And then that was really my launch right there. So it started subcontracting, figuring out how this works and understanding the process and what people are saying and what they're doing, and understanding also a little bit about the pricing structure too, and then developing my own stuff. And then boom, that was the step into my own consulting business in the diversity space.
So Buck, what's interesting is you had all of this experience, you were developing your content, but it sounds like one of your customers actually was the push that you needed to launch out. Isn't it interesting how important customers are, how they play pivotal parts in just our journeys?
Yes. And people who had been in my classes who were at, let's just say I'm working at a General Mills, and then a participant in a class moves to another company. And they like you, they believe in you, and they don't have a contract with the big wig consulting firm, but they're like, we can't afford them, but we like you, and we think you would be a good fit for our organization. And then they pull you into their new VP of HR job at another company. So you may have 35 participants in these training classes. You never know where one of these 35 people are going to go. You never know how they're going to open doors for you. And that's why I've always tried to be very kind to every soul in front of me every time.
Because you just never know where that check is going to come from. I mean, Tara, you have a similar experience.
Absolutely. Like referrals are the name of the game, and constantly people 5 years later, 3 years later will call me and say, hey, remember me? And I'm like, no, but sure. and that becomes the pipeline. And Buck, one of the big questions that always comes up with our audience is, how do you get clients? How did you get your first client? How do you maintain clients? And I think there's this fear, right? So you've got 35 people in every class. Do you have to keep track of all these people to kind of keep this network open? What do you do to nurture it, if to maximize these referrals?
So today I'm better at it. Back then, I wasn't really chasing all the participants in the classes because they were participants for the consulting firms that I was subcontracting for. So those were their leads. Now, if somebody from that class reached out to me a year later, then that's a whole different game. There's no, breaking of a contract or anything like that. It's just networking. And that was one of the biggest things. And it was really what changed my business from just doing diversity and inclusion training to then doing other types of work. Because as you know, the D&I space is heavy. And I'm in this heavy space and I'm like, whoa, I need another focus area, another lane that is not as heavy as this diversity lane. Yeah, because I'm gonna burn out. I mean, you certainly understand.
Yeah.
So I've been reading a lot about happiness and the importance of happiness and how it tied to business. And that client who went to a really big job in HR for this wonderful manufacturing, was a big CPG company. About a year in, she said, if you've got anything else, we'll take it from you because we love you and we want you to be doing something else, but we don't need just D&I anymore. What else you got? And I'm like, I've got this happiness thing that I've been thinking about. What do you think about that? And she's like, sold, bring it. And the biggest thing that she did this is what I really wanted to start with, is she called me in December and said, we've got contracts with you next year and we want to pay you for the whole year up front in January. See, this was huge because, as you know, we're chasing the next training. We're chasing the next project. And I'd been reading about happiness, but I didn't have time to create a workshop because I was too busy trying to find another diversity training opportunity. And when she called me and said, hey, we want to pay you for all of our diversity training next year, that gave me this peace of mind that I'd never had before. Now, it was a chunk of money that we had to deduct as I delivered the work. So it wasn't like I just coasted. But what it is, I didn't have the nervousness about hunting the next paycheck. And that freed me up from a creative standpoint, where I'm like, oh, I have time now to develop this happiness program. And that changed my business fundamentally when I had that cushion.
That's interesting. So let's talk about the hunt a little bit, because the one thing that people, like Tara was asking you earlier about how you got your customers, we often get asked, how do you price yourself? And then when you have somebody that prepaid you, which I just called, they just put services on layaway. You just deducted.
They did.
They had consulting services on layaway. And you're like, okay, I can do that. And then I just take a little bit at a time.
Totally, yeah.
Talk to me about that hunt and then that pricing game. How did you figure that out?
Well, so if you do your research, you can find what your competition is charging. You can. So you just have to do some digging. And some of it is people are calling, asking for proposals, and you don't get the work. And you say, why did I not get the work? And they're like, you were too high, or you were so low that we were concerned that you were not going to deliver a quality service. So I'm like, okay, I know the high, I know the low. I got to be somewhere in the middle. Sometimes, nowadays, many clients will tell me what their budget is. They'll say, this is what we got. Now, I always ask, like, what are you expecting? Can you tell? And many people will tell you what they have in their budget because everybody's got a budget. Now, if they're doing RFPs, which I don't do a lot of RFPs, they won't tell you that stuff. But nowadays, it was from research. It was from asking other consultants, how are you pricing? That's another thing about being solo, is you got to form alliances with people, and especially people who are doing better than you are. So I would call my friends who are really knocking out the ballpark and say, okay, help me here. I don't know how to price this. And they would say, well, this is typically what I've learned. So there are wonderful people out there who are ahead of you, who know what people are charging. So use your resources, do your research online, and then manage your misses. Find out if you were too high. I had somebody just say the other day that she submitted a proposal for like $18,000, and all of the other proposals came in at 85,000. And the potential client was just like, whoa, something is way off. And she had drastically underbid it. So am I being clear about, so it's research, it's asking people, and then just ask your clients, you know, what have you got to spend? What do you want to spend? And many of them will tell you.
You know what? I just had a call today, and I thought it was interesting because I had the conversation about, well, what's your budget? Because sometimes they have the budget and sometimes they don't. But another way to utilize your resources and your customers too is if you have a customer at the same company, you can ask them to help you.
Yes, absolutely.
Because usually people are super helpful. I think the key is you have to ask.
Yeah. You have to ask, which a lot of people, they're so afraid to talk about money. And I did a lot of reading in my early 20s, business books, and talking about pricing your worth. And when I would get these opportunities, I'm like, all right, well, I know that there's dollars attached to that. And corporations, they need to spend their money because they've got to get rid of their budgets or they'll yank it next year. So I've always been very fair with my pricing. And then I know that these big consulting firms who do what I do, I know they got big dollars attached to their invoices, enormous. So I'm like way under what they're doing. So research is a big piece of it, and asking, you know, what do you want to spend? What do you think is fair? And people will tell you. The hunt, when I first got on as a subcontractor with J. Howard and Associates, they were so reputable that I could call any other consulting firm that needed subcontractors. And if I said I'm doing work for J. Howard and Associates, they would say, well, if you can do his work, you can do our work. So come over here. And that's a dance too of subcontracting for multiple consulting firms. And, but they know you're doing it because they can't give you enough business to feed you full time. So they know you got to go somewhere else. So people were fairly doggone respectful about understanding that, you know, we got to feed ourselves. We got to keep our lights on. So they knew that I was doing it. With Pro Group was a big name back then. Kaleidoscope Group, who's still around. Jay Howard is now sold out, and it's now Korn Ferry. So people understood that, you know, you had to hustle to get gigs. And now, fortunately, since I've been doing this so long, you know, I have people are calling, people are reaching out. And then I did, you know, I've been on CNN quite a few times, and that exposure helped too. So I haven't done a ton of cold calling in the last 15 years.
Oh, wow. Wow. Terry, you got some? I got a lot of questions, but I've been asking them. So Terry, what you got?
No, I'm like this. First of all, this is a phenomenal book. How did I know you this long and not know all this? So I'm curious. You evolved it now into this happiness area, and you're doing a lot of new work. What is the hardest thing about that shift? Like we're very big on lessons learned, right? So what has been hard or surprising about kind of shifting your business?
I've almost always shifted based on client need. So it hasn't been very, like, I had the happiness thing sitting in my head, and I'd done a bunch of reading, and I'm like, I think that people could benefit from this in a business context. And so I had this passion ready when the client said, we want something more. And when I said happiness, they said, we'll buy it. So the client wanted happiness. And then the most recent work is the resilience work, where two clients called me in the same week. about 3 years ago and said, you know, there's so much political noise in this country that the outside's coming in and people are not focused. Can you give us something? And then another client called and said, Buck, you know, we're going through a merger acquisition and people are unsettled. Their feet are 4 feet off the ground. Can you give us something to calm them down and keep them focused? And I'm like, I think you're talking about resilience. So, and they're like, that's exactly what we're talking about. So that I listened to the client instead of just arbitrarily thinking someone will benefit from XYZ training. Unless I'm really passionate about it, then I just listen to the client. So that's been a big piece of it. And you asked what else was the hard thing about shifting the business?
Yeah.
So it hasn't been the hardest thing that I've been going through lately. So the training led to speaking, because people would see you in a group of 30 and they would say, you know, we've got this big conference coming up and we're going to have 300, 500. We think you'd be great for that. So those doors open as a result of being good in the small classroom. That led to the keynoting. And listening to the client led to the evolution of the content to focus on. So that's been pretty easy. But I tell you, the most painful thing for me in the last 5 years is trying to get a team of people together to help me launch motivational videos, social media content, and developing that type of stuff. That's been one of my biggest pain points, and is something that I'm sitting in today, where you think you've got a team, you think you know where you're headed, but it's so foreign to me that I'm struggling. So you know Jay Shetty, y'all know Jay Shetty, right?
Yep.
You know Jay Shetty?
I do.
So I'm really chasing where he's going in the social media world. I like his reach. I like his message. So I've been using him as a model of where I can go. And I hired one of his marketing people a couple of years ago to help rebrand me and get me going. And some of it's worked, some of it's not worked. So it's just been getting a team of people together, figuring out this whole social media, grow your following game. You know, I've like 1,500 followers. I'll look online and I'll see people who I've never heard of. They got 50,000 followers. I'm like, how are y'all doing that? How are you doing that?
So how did you go ahead, Tim?
This is the perfect time to plug. So along with the branding, Buck has t-shirts that say "You Matter." They're fabulous.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That, I tell you, that is, I'm really proud of that small line of t-shirts, because it started as a gift. Like about 8 years ago, I thought I like logos and I like putting out a positive message. I'm like, what can I create that I can just give away? And so I hired a designer in New York to come up with that logo. And I would pack some with me when I would travel, or when I would wear one. If anybody would compliment me on a plane, I would say, give me your name and number and I'll mail you one. And
wow,
people were floored. They were floored that I was giving them a t-shirt just for complimenting me. And it was not a cheap t-shirt. It's a very soft t-shirt.
Yeah, no, it's good quality.
It's really cute. And it's got such a special vibe to it. And then over the course of 4 or 5 years, people are like, well, I want to buy some for my family. I want to buy some for my family. So it's a very grassroots effort of growing that little You Matter brand. And I'm still launching it. You know, I can see it in Oprah magazine. I can see it one of her favorite things. So those are all on my vision boards.
Well, you know, Oprah listens to this podcast. So so Oprah, get on it.
Oh yeah.
What, Tara, you matter.
Because you matter, Oprah, you matter.
The thing, I love this shirt because anytime I wear it, people like, you know, have you had this? People will go, you matter. And it's only failed me once. I was in a bar in Atlanta and some dude comes up and he says, does that say you mother? And I'm like, no, it says you matter.
How many drinks had he had?
I don't know, but obviously one too many. So thank you for sharing that you're wearing that message.
No, it's a positive message. It definitely represents some of the things you were talking about as far as happiness. It actually brings a smile to people's faces. And I can tell you, audience, that when Tara and I went through Buck's class, we smiled the whole time. Because not only was it it was meaningful information, it was delivered in such a way where it didn't seem so heavy. So like you said, your message, although very important, it's not intended to beat people down.
Yeah, right. And that's what I found when I first got into this consulting world and the training world, is that the training classes were 8 hours long, sometimes 2 days long, and it was riddled with exclusion. And I get that. We have to talk about people being excluded. But there was just something missing for me in it. I'm like, it can't be all about exclusion and how just to avoid that. And so that's when I incorporated this data on the importance of positive emotions, because who feels more positive emotions than anybody else is people who feel included.
Yeah.
And the data, the diversity data out there, I've cited it for years, and audiences go, okay, you know, so the organization will outperform by 35% or 18%. And it just didn't resonate with people. But when I started bringing in this data on how we're more creative, we're more insightful, we see things that other people don't see, and doctors are having this effect. And, you know, if you prime someone with positive emotions before taking their SATs, they do better on their SATs. That's when people started really relating to the message. We talk about exclusion too. We just talk about it through the lens of positivity, which seems quite a contradiction, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so now, you know what? We've talked a lot, and hopefully the audience gets the positive vibe. But the reality is, Buck, is that you have walked into some uncharted territories at times. What made you scared, if at all?
When you ask that question, there are two things that come up. There's physical scared and mental/emotional scared. So we'll go with the mental emotional scared of owning a business and the fear of not being able to pay your bills. So that was one of the scariest things early on. Is I'm 29 years old. It is all on me. There is no trust fund. There is no padding. I mean, I had a little bit of savings. And so that was always very scary for me. And it was a roller coaster ride. Like some years I would do well. And then other years, you know, one of the toughest years is when I moved to Los Angeles and my rent was outrageous and I was the furthest away from my family and my business just dried up. I mean, there was just nothing happening. So I had to get a part-time job teaching, you know, for a year. And but I stayed in the game and I still did a contracting every now and then. So there was that fear early on. And then I realized while I was out there, I'm like, you've never starved. You've never missed a bill. You're going to be fine. And I just stayed in the game. So that was scary. And then the physical scare is there's some people who don't want to hear about treating people better. They don't want to hear me talking about racism or how to be an anti-racist or civil rights. And you know, I've got a death threat. I've gotten, you know, at the end of my trainings, I've had someone you be careful walking to, no, not be careful. You watch out on the way to your rental car.
You're kidding me.
Oh no. Oh no. And I've
That's crazy.
Hate mail from the time I was on, the very first time I was on CNN, you know, it was a dream to be on CNN. It was a dream. And we're talking about race relations and I get home and there's all this hate mail in my email box. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm underneath my message. I'm talking about love. I'm talking about kindness. And I called Don Lemon. I'm like, Don, you go get me killed. and Don's like, if they take a shot at you, we'll just have you back on talking about it.
Thanks, Don.
Yes, exactly. But so there been really tough times because some people don't want to hear about civil rights and equality. And even the last year has probably been one of the hardest years of my career, feeling very isolated because the work that I've done around race and being an ally has been some of the deepest work around race issues that I've ever done. And I've never felt more alone doing it as a white guy.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's so hard.
I do some work with, do you know Spirit She's a host on the Oprah Winfrey Network, and she's on Dr. Drew. She's a PhD. She's this wonderful woman we do a program called Race, Resilience, and the Role of Being an Ally. And she's an African-American woman. And last year we were debriefing, and she said, you're in a tough spot. She said, you're in a tough spot because she's like, you're not Black. She's like, we love you. She said, but you're not Black. And you're doing something very different than a lot of white guys are doing. And she said, so I really feel for you. I mean, I also know that I'm in a very privileged place too. So, I can opt out of this anytime I want to, but I'm passionate about it. I'm nuts about it, to be honest with you.
That number one, that speaks to kind of the solopreneur journey. Like it's a labor of love, right? To do the things that we do, really, you have to believe in them so strongly. And sometimes you have to believe in them when no one else does.
Oh yeah.
And that can be really hard. And like the isolation, that loneliness that you speak of, like, I think it's something that we all have felt at different times. Like it's very hard. Like, I don't, not everyone is tackling one of the hardest topics right now, like racism, but still it's very easy in our own worlds to feel alone in this, right? Like most of us don't have friends that are solopreneurs that are tackling these hard things. You kind of feel like you're crazy at times. Like how have you managed to kind of keep yourself centered and sane? Because it's emotional work.
Yeah. My relationships with other people in the field and out of the field has been what has sustained me. So when we, if any of your listeners feel alone, I want to remind you that you're not alone. You are not alone. There are a lot of people out there who are trying to do what we are doing, who are doing what we're doing. And so reach out to them and ask them for their resources, ask them for their support. So our social connection is critical in this, because it is so isolating. And then you remind me of, having an abiding belief in what you are doing and in yourself. When I first started this, when I was 29, had two roommates, and one of them was working for a $1 billion company. And he's just like, what are you doing? He's like, you need to get on with one of these companies that has a 401k and they have benefits. And then underneath that came, who do you think you are? And I'm like, well, I'm just trying to do what I think I can do. And he's like, but you have no security. And at that time, I was doing subcontracting for two companies, and they had multiple clients. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm going into State Farm and I'm going into Microsoft. So there were like 10 clients that I was working with through those consulting firms. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you're with one company and I have 10 that I'm going into. I'm not buying this. I don't have any security, because the chances of all 10 of those going down or stopping is very different than your one. So you have to believe in yourself, and you have to I had to reinforce that every day and trust that I could pull it off. And if you have high self-confidence and you put in effective effort, you can pull it off. And the world will tell you if you're not going in the right direction, because you'll meet barrier after barrier after barrier.
I like the way you pointed out to your then roommate, the one company that he was working for versus the 10, because we always run into people who say, well, they have a job, so they're secure. And I don't know about you, but I am the layoff queen. I have been laid off from anything that could lay off. I've been laid off. I have closed down organizations that didn't think. I mean, who thought Sears catalog would go out of business?
Right.
Nobody. Right. So that level of security was easily shot.
Yes.
And I was like, actually, there is that time when you feel like I'm actually a little bit more secure because especially since you're so scrappy, I have scrappiness on my side to go get that other customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the beautiful things about doing your own thing, is the freedom that comes with it. So in the years where I wasn't making, a lot of money, or just mediocre money, the years that I was struggling, I would say to myself, I would not give $150,000 a year for my freedom. Like, you just have to know, because there's so many people that get 2 weeks vacation, 3 weeks vacation, and that's a wrap. And that's a really wonderful place to be if that's what you want. I mean, I have friends who've been with companies 28 and 30 years. They have phenomenal pension programs. And but they many of them hated it for many years. They dreaded it. And life's too short for me to dread. So I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So when times got hard, I did other things. I always said, you know what, I'll go to work multiple part-time jobs. You know, I'll pick up one teaching, I'll pick up one at Starbucks if I need to. And that afforded me to do other things. I moved to LA and I pitched a kids TV show. And so those things gave me a lot of joy, in addition to the work that I was doing that may have not been popping that year.
Okay, that is so important. Like for the solo CEOs, we're very big on like what's the total life, right? You don't pick this work just because you think it's gonna be the biggest startup ever. Like there's other paths for that. Like for us, it's about like it's as much about doing great work and running real business that supports us, but supports a lifestyle that we want, right? It's in service of a life, and that's such a huge message, because there's so much of this that the benefit is not necessarily on the balance sheet.
Totally. Like the fact that you were able to pop down and stay with your mom, you know, that freedom is amazing. Now, it got a little scary last year when my business went to zero almost when COVID hit. So I had a book of work, you know, keynotes, like all of this stuff. And then in 2 weeks,
how'd you deal with that? Talk us real quick about that, because that's the real talk right there.
I'm fortunate that I live small. So I don't have a ton of debt, and I'm a good saver. And I freaked out for probably 2 days, and I'm like, this is going to be a very different year. You're not going to do the things that you thought you were going to do. Instead, you'll go home and spend time with your mom and dad. You'll do some home projects with them, socially distanced. And then I said, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to just give up on your year because things shifted so fast. So change the narrative in your head. And you don't have to say it's going to be one of the best years of your career, but you don't have to say it's going to be the worst either. And so it was dead for about 3 months, other than one client pivoted real quick to virtual. And that was sort of like baseline stuff. So I'm like, all right, that's great. At least I've got that foundation. And then sadly, when George Floyd was murdered, clients called and they're like, hey, can you help us? And that was about 3 months in. It was actually May of this year. And the client's like, we need some help. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. I can certainly help. So then it started to pick up after that. But it's a good thing that I teach resilience for a living. And I've said this for years. I'm like, I teach what I want to learn. Because I quickly started to spin real quick.
The universe sometimes hands you things that you never would have thought in a million years would come.
Totally.
Oh my God. All right. So like I could talk to you all day, Buck. Like this is.
Yeah, I told you, Buck is just amazing.
Oh, thank you.
All day long, right? So as we start to wrap up this interview, what advice do you have for solo CEOs? Like, what's one lesson or one piece of advice that for any of our people who are listening that you'd like them to have?
I'm a big believer in there's power in numbers, there's wisdom in crowds. And some of my biggest mistakes have been where I haven't vetted my idea with multiple people before I tried to deliver on it. And it didn't go, because sometimes I can get so excited about an idea, and I've been doing it so long, you can create this artificial belief that you know what you're doing. And just 3 years ago, I was delivering a message to a big group of senior people. And at the last minute, I decided to change my opening. And I had every opportunity to vet my opening with really close people who love me. And I did not do it. And I opened up, and it did not work. And ultimately, that opening got me fired. That opening was a closing.
So
So
like exit door left over there.
so my point is reach and ask people's opinions on what you're doing and get diversity of thought in that. And don't, if you're wanting to be if you want to be a speaker, vet your speech. If you want to be a trainer, vet your training. If you're developing other products, you may think your product is great, but other people have to think it's great too. So be open to the feedback, because that stuff is even if they crack your face and say that is not going to work, then ask them why. So vet your ideas. Look for people to invite people to poke holes in your ideas, because it'll save you in the long run. Because there was a big cost to me on that one. Yeah,
Wow.
and it wrecked me for a few weeks.
Wow. You know what though? I like the fact, like you're saying, hey, I've been doing this for over 20 years and we still stumble sometimes.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Still
absolutely.
stumble. We're still learning.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, I'll never do that again. I'll never do that again.
Client, because he got fired.
Yeah. My dad, he is a good mentor to me. And whenever I would derail as a kid, there was never any name calling. There was never any bashing. It was always, his response most of the time was, that's good training for you. It's really good training for you. And when I stopped spinning on that one, I thought, that's good training for you. You won't ever do that again. So I have a colleague named Gloria Cotton, who you may know. She goes, so what? Now what? So what? Now what?
Ooh,
I like that.
nice. So what now?
Now what? Basically, learn and keep it moving.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, our SoloCEO community is all about supporting each other. And although Tara and I are happily supporting and wearing You Matter shirts,
yes.
How can we help and support you with any other things that you're doing? Because you have just spilled all the tea when it comes to the journey, that thing that's important for people. How can we help you? How can our community help you?
Yeah, and thank you. This is what I love about what you're asking is I will coach, and I do some coaching from time to time, but I have had over the years lots of younger people asking me, how did you get into your work and how did you start your business? And I always tell them, when you reach out to people that you're doing informational interviews with, or even an interview with, always ask, what can I do for you? And they're like, but I'm 22 and they're 52. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. You never know who you might know that's going to help them. So never forget to ask that question. So thank you for asking that question. Support me on social media and spread the message. That's probably the biggest need right now is encouraging followers.
Where can we find you? Tell us, our audience, where we can find you.
You can find me on Facebook at Buck Davis. You can find me at buckdavis.com on the web. You can find me at Buck Davis on Instagram. Those are the three main channels where you can track me down. And I will be pushing out some more content. I will be creating. This is one of the things that I'm excited about. There's so much positive energy around this resilience work that people will say to me afterwards, how can my son in college get this? How can my husband get this? So I'm going to be creating e-learning where any of us could go on for, $49 or $59 and you dial in, and there's 6 to 10 modules on how to be resilient. So that should be coming hopefully this year. That's the goal.
All right. Well, we'll have to get on that as soon as it's available.
Yeah. I appreciate it. So that's right now, I think that's the biggest thing you can do for me. And just the fact that you invited me to be here means the world. So thank you for that.
Oh, it's a world to us. Tara, and Tara is not all just business. She has a little playful side.
Yeah. Yes. Talk to me about your playful side.
No, talk to me about your playful side. So our tagline is my work, my way, because that's a huge piece of kind of what the solopreneur is. But we play our way. Yeah. So share with us, how do you play?
Yeah. I live small, but I live well. And I have a phenomenal little backyard that has this beautiful fireplace. And so I spent a lot of time out there by that fire, drinking wine with my friends and listening to music and eating good food. So that has really been one of the most playful experiences in the last year. And I feel so fortunate to have the space because we couldn't be in each other's houses. And my friends and I spent a lot of time out there laying in the grass, singing, looking at the stars, and just listening to music and listening to various people, share stories about their experience of that song. So that's been one of the, and we did that last weekend in South Carolina for my birthday. People around the fire pit, and they were taking turns DJing the music and just popping in and, I know this person, or I did this, I love this song, and what about this beat? And so that's brought me a lot of joy. And it's my backyard. Lots of time outside.
Wonderful.
Oh my God, I love that.
Tara, we gotta find some time to go and check out this backyard.
I'm just saying, I like wine too, Buck.
You do? Yes. You land in Atlanta, I will absolutely have a wine tasting in my backyard for you folks. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the time you spend with us and all of the jewels that you dropped during this conversation.
You're welcome. I hope that it was specific enough where people could take any of it and act on it. Because theory is great, but I also need to know, what do I do? What do I need to do? So I hope that your audience and you folks found it specific enough for people to be able to take action on it.
I'm about to take action on it myself, so I know they found something good.
That's
but
great.
Thank you so much. Audience, you matter. Get the t-shirt.
You can find those at shopbuckdavis.com. Yeah.
Get
everybody comments on this shirt. I'm telling you, even I was in Home Depot and the young lady at Home Depot, she looked at me and she goes, "I like your shirt." I had forgotten I had it on.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, thank you."
Here's the thing. It's nothing but love. It is nothing but love. It's pure joy. And people, I think it's the most important message that a person could receive. And if more people felt like they mattered, I think the world would be in a much better place.
I think you're right.
Oh, what better words to close on? Thank you, Buck.
Thank you,
Buck.
Buck.
Thank you, audience. We will see y'all next time.
Thank you, folks. Got nothing but love for you too. All right. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the Solo CEOs, please share this podcast with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, you can follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram at the Solo CEOs, or stop by our website for videos, resources, and other great stuff. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.